Hey, what's up, Path to Freedom listeners? Thank you for dropping into another episode. This is episode 124. It's been a few weeks since I've brought a new episode or any new content to the podcast. We've kind of gone back and republished some of the most downloaded episodes. Some of, personally my favorite guests that I've had the opportunity to interview on the show. So that's been a lot of fun, but there's been, some stuff going on that has prevented me from, recording podcasts as regularly as I like to. I'll have an episode coming out in the next week or two that expands a little bit on why that is. And, hopefully that will be helpful to some people because, it's definitely been a learning experience for us in our businesses. So, want to share some of that experience and, hopefully others can, benefit from some of what, we're learning as we build our franchise businesses. But in terms of today's episode, my guest is Houston Barnes. Houston is a franchise attorney with Barnes Law. And at this point in his career, Houston specializes in working with franchise buyers to review franchise agreements and advise them on a number of things, which is really, a lot of what we discuss in this episode. Houston shares, some of the common, things that people should be looking for in a franchise agreement, talks a little bit about some of the things that, maybe at first glance seem a little bit spooky or like red flags in a franchise agreement. But, when you really understand how franchising works and the relationship between the franchisor and the franchisee, a lot of these things, really should not be as intimidating as they may sound. But, Houston is an excellent resource. He's worked as a franchise attorney for many years now, has experience on the franchisor side, which he's now able to leverage with his franchise buyer clients. So, this is obviously a critical part of getting into franchise ownership, right? There is a legal agreement that is executed between the franchisor and the franchisee. And anytime someone's signing a legal agreement, it's usually a good idea to have an attorney review that agreement, really make sure you understand exactly what it is you're signing, what you're agreeing to. But Houston also talks about some areas that, he's often able to, work with his client and the franchisor and, help them agree on some terms that are, maybe more agreeable to the buyer, but that the franchisor is still happy with too. So a lot of good information in this episode. So without further ado, let's drop in with Houston Barnes.
Thanks so much for having me, Wes. Hopefully, we got some people out there who are looking at getting into the wonderful world of franchising and changing their lives here.
Yeah. There's from what I'm seeing, a increase in interest, with I guess just everything going on in the world and the economy. So I think there are a lot of people out there that, are starting to think that franchising could be a really good avenue for them. And, your emphasis is very important because obviously, when you enter into a franchise agreement, that's a binding legal agreement between a franchisor and a franchisee. So give us kind of an overview, what do you do specifically as a franchise attorney?
Yeah. So as you look into getting into franchising, what you're looking at getting into is usually at least a 5 or 10 year commitment, but hopefully a commitment that's going to be 20, 30, the rest of your life years. And everything in franchising is governed by the franchise agreement. And there is a contract that you're going to enter into with that franchisor that's going to dictate what hours you can be open, what clothes you can wear, what items you can sell. It's going to be a very thorough document that's going to guide you through this journey. And that's where I live. So everything in franchising is guided by this franchise agreement. That franchise agreement is summarized in what's called a franchise disclosure document. And the Federal Trade Commission, they're the ones who oversee this. And every time you look at a franchise, as you go down the path, they are required to show you a franchise disclosure document.
Mm-hmm.
And they are required to give you all the information from financials to whether they have past litigation to any information that you can imagine about this franchising and franchising in general. And when you get that document, if those of you who've seen one know what I'm talking about, other folks, when you get your first franchise disclosure document, you're looking at anywhere from 200 to 400 pages of just pure legalese. And so that's where I come in. So you bring me in for two reasons. One, I'm going to come in. I review hundreds of these a year. I stay up with industry standards. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to help you understand what that thing says.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to boil that 400 pages down into 10 pages. And I'm going to have a conversation with you and answer any questions you have. And also there's a common misconception in franchising that there's no negotiation. What you'll hear from a lot of people, from a lot of franchisors, is they'll say that they're going to give you a contract and take it or leave it. And that's just simply not true. Again, I do hundreds of deals a year. I would say, and I don't have this as a fact, but I would guess 60% of my clients, we end up negotiating some of those points. And so it's real important as you go through this process to have somebody who can help you understand what's going on, but B, help you get the best deal possible, because even little tweaks now can make a big difference as they accumulate over time in your franchising journey.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think the other huge advantage to having someone like yourself, review the franchise agreement versus, I work with people all the time that are looking at buying into a franchise. And I mean, I've seen it all, right? Well, my brother-in-law is a divorce attorney, or, just because someone's an attorney doesn't necessarily mean they're the best person to review your franchise agreement for you. The fact that you see hundreds and hundreds of these different franchise agreements every single year, you're able to really, look at an individual franchise agreement and say, yeah, you know what, this is pretty par for the course in terms of how franchise agreements, or, oh, you know what, I don't usually see this particular clause in most franchise agreements. So this is something maybe we want to look a little closer at. I think giving someone, that's never been down that road of buying a franchise before, giving them some perspective in terms of, this is how a franchise agreement typically reads. So this is not out of the norm, or, this is a little bit different. That's invaluable.
Yeah. I mean, I always tell my clients, you don't want to go to your podiatrist for a heart issue.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. This is and franchise contracts, they are not like any other corporate contract you're going to have out there. Yeah. It is a whole different world. And so no matter what you do, you want to see a specialist who specializes in franchise law. Just like if you had cancer, you go to an oncologist, and if you had a heart issue, you'd go to a cardiologist. When you get into franchising, go see a franchise attorney.
Yeah. So you, at this point, just work with people on the buying side of franchising. Is that correct?
So when you look at the world of franchising, you obviously have two sides, right? You have the franchisor side, which is the corporations, the big companies that are actually selling the franchise. And you have the franchisee side. And the franchisees, those are the people, those are the entrepreneurs, those are the people listening, I assume, to this podcast who are looking to get into business for themselves, get out of the rat race. And I have in the past worked with franchisors. At this point, I am franchisee only. I work with the individuals. I work with the families. It's much more dynamic. It's much more engaging. It's much more exciting. And so that's really, I come from an entrepreneurial background, and so working with the franchisees is really where my passion is right now, and exclusively where my practice is now. Right now, I only do franchisee representation, which comes to another point as you do enter into this journey and look at working with professionals, especially in the legal space. It's very helpful to look for somebody who focuses on the franchisee. The goals and the strategies for fairly representing a franchisor can be very different than the goals and strategies from representing a franchisee. And there also could be and are oftentimes many conflicts of interest.
Yeah, I've seen it. I mean, I've worked with other franchise attorneys in the past that, do work on both sides of the table. And, every now and then, I've heard back from them, hey, I can't, talk to this person about this franchise agreement because I actually represent the franchisor. Therefore, there's a conflict of interest. But I think your point in terms of just, someone like yourself that exclusively focuses on the franchisee side, again, it just gives you better perspective, better context, versus, you're doing a little bit over here on the franchisor side, which can be very different, right? Than working with someone that's, looking to buy into a franchise. I'm curious from all of your experience, what would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions or concerns that someone may have, the first time they read through a franchise agreement that in reality are probably not something that they should be that concerned about when it boils down to it?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few misconceptions that people come into it. One I've already touched on. And the first is that what you are entering into is a take it or leave it proposition, right? They're going to present you with a franchise agreement, and you will hear some people say, hey, this is it. You have to enter into the system exactly as is. Every client I work with is different. They all have different concerns. They all have different sensitivities. And so we want to work to get them in the best place possible. The second thing that I think people really need to understand and to think about is that when you're getting into a franchise, you're getting into a living, growing system. You have a contract, and that contract is going to govern the what lawyers call the material terms of this franchise. But a lot of what you do is going to be guided by the operations manual, and it's going to be guided by you, the franchisee, working with the franchisor. So I'm a big believer in life, whether it's with marriage, kids, neighbors, or in business, that communication gets you 95% of the way. That 95% of issues we have as humans is just a lack of communication.
Yeah.
Failure to reach out when there's an issue, failure to just touch base every once in a while. And so what I think the biggest advice I give people when they get into franchising is I say, hey, these other franchisees in your system, they're not your competitors. They're not your enemies. They are your partners in this.
Yeah.
And if you think you're struggling with something and it's just you struggling in this franchise with that item, whether that franchise has 5 other franchisees or whether it has 5,000, I bet you if you get on the phone and you call some other folks, they're struggling with that same issue. Or if they're not struggling, they have struggled and they figured it out in the past. So there are a lot of franchises that have annual conventions, which I think is great because then you're forced to sit in a room with everyone else, and during your coffee break, you can say, oh man, can you believe the system crashed last week? Yeah, how'd you deal with that?
Yeah.
But outside of that, so many people call me and they say, hey, I'm struggling with this with my franchise. And I say, hey, what other franchisees have you talked with?
Yeah.
And they say none. And I say, well, get on the phone, talk to them. Also, this is not a dictatorship where the franchisor just lords over the franchisee. You also can and should pick up the phone and call the franchisor and say, hey, franchisor, today I'm really struggling with this. What can we do to get ourselves in a better position? And that's the whole point of a franchise system, is that, yeah, you're running your own business, but you're not on your own.
Yeah.
You're never alone in franchising, because you have that franchisor who their whole purpose in life is to be there to support you.
Yeah, it's so true. It's, at the end of the day, it's a partnership is what it boils down to between the franchisee and the franchisor, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship. When it's done the right way, the better the franchisees do, the better the franchisor does. So they're very incentivized. And I think, your points are spot on. And this is something that, I try to remind candidates of when I'm coaching them through this process, is like, look, yes, there is this legal agreement. Yes, you need to be, fully aware of everything that you are agreeing to and will be obligated to under this agreement. But, a big part of the research is, really getting to know the franchisor, understanding the culture, that particular brand has. Obviously, you're getting to speak with other franchise owners as you're going through the due diligence. If you get into a brand where it really does feel like it's a good culture fit, and if you feel like, if you have the chance to meet the founders or the leadership team before, making a decision, if you feel like, they would be the types of people that you want to partner with, that, I think, in a lot of cases goes a long way to, mitigate some of the concerns that people may have. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I always think about a franchise agreement is so much of what's in there is, really just defining ahead of time what happens if kind of a worst case scenario were to materialize. And so I tell people, I'm like, look, if you have every intention of, following the system, working hard, being a good franchisee, chances are so much of what's in this agreement never even comes into play, because, it's going to be a good relationship between you and the franchisor, and they're there to support you. And, look, I've worked on the franchisor side. I've worked for 2 different brands, and I never saw an instance, outside of 1 or 2 where the franchisee was clearly out of compliance, where the franchisor threw the book at them, right? Instead, it was, hey, let's talk about this. Let's see what we can do. You're not hitting your marketing minimums. Let's get you, on the phone with the marketing team, see what we can figure out. That's always, I shouldn't say always, but in most cases, that's going to be the first course of action with any good franchisor before they sit down and say, well, see this section of your franchise agreement, and here's what we're going to have to do.
So there's one word that you said in there that I want to focus on, and that's personality. Mm-hmm. We have 2 personalities in every franchise relationship. We have the personality of the franchisee, and we have the personality of the franchisor. And every different franchisor has a different personality. And so I get the question a lot. They say, hey, what franchise would you open? Or they say, what should I get into this franchise? And that's an impossible question to answer. Yeah. I mean, there's some clients who come to me who they're passionate about chicken fingers, and they want to open up a fast casual chicken finger restaurant, right? There's some people who just really want to do the dirty job and really want to install temporary wall systems and do something that's very unsexy, but has great returns. And so choosing a franchise is so much about your personality and what's going to get you up every morning and working. And for some people, it can be different sectors of the industry. For some people, it might be purely monetary. Mm-hmm. And that's absolutely fine. They might say, you know what, I don't care if I'm digging ditches or if I'm selling jewelry, I just want to make money. And that's okay. Now, the other side is you have personalities, the franchisors. There are some systems that you can get into that are more partnerships that give you the freedom that say, hey, you market however you want. You can send out mailers if you want, do commercials. We're just here to kind of support the tent poles. Uh, there's those franchises all the way to the side of you absolutely have no freedom,
Yeah.
where they say, you come in and we're going to dictate what time you wake up in the morning. We're going to dictate everything you sell. You are not allowed to even log on to Facebook without our permission. And to some people, having that structure and just following the system to a T, that's very liberating.
Yeah.
To other people like myself, I joke that I'm virtually unemployable.
Yeah.
If you put me in a large Fortune 500 company, I'm pretty sure that I would be fired by lunchtime if I didn't quit on my own.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it really is just a matter of personality. So it's important to look at what is the personality that of you, what lifestyle do you want? Absentee owner, day to day, hands on, in a car all the time, and to look at the personality of the franchisor. What kind of system, big, small, hands on, hands off, are you looking into with those respects as well?
Yeah, it's a conversation I have with every candidate, right? Because there's, like you said, these different personality of franchisors, and a lot of times, not always, there's exceptions to this, but a lot of time the more mature and established a franchise system is, the more structured it's going to be, right? Versus, an emerging brand that's really just getting started. That's where those early franchisees are likely to have a lot of autonomy, right? And the franchisor is really looking for the types of franchisees to come on board early on that are going to follow the system that's there, but also continue to innovate and, help, cultivate the system going forward. And so that's something that's important for people to really understand, because to your point, there are certainly people that are going to thrive in a much more structured, system. They're probably also going to look at that as, maybe a little bit less risky because there's more of a track record with a more established brand. There's more data, that they're able to review, versus something that's emerging. In some cases, there's very little data in terms of other franchisee performance. So there's not one right or wrong approach. It really does come down to the individual and what they're looking to get out of business ownership and what's going to be the best fit for them. If you're listening to this podcast, then there's a good chance that you're looking to create more freedom in your own life. There's also a good chance that you realize that owning your own business can be a great way to take more control of your livelihood and create more of that freedom that we're all looking for. Also, if you've been listening to the show for a while, you realize that I specialize in franchise ownership. In addition to owning franchise businesses myself, I have a franchise consulting firm, Path to Freedom, where I help people navigate what is typically an overwhelming process of understanding franchising, identifying specific franchise companies that could be a fit, and then conducting the due diligence in a thorough and efficient manner with those franchise brands. My whole purpose here is to leverage my experience working for franchisors, owning franchises myself, and how we've been able to use that to create more freedom in our lives and help you determine if that could be a path that makes sense for you as well. So if any of this sounds interesting, if you've considered business ownership in the past, whether you've explored franchising specifically or not, I'd love to connect with you. I'd love to learn more about you and what it is that you're working towards in your life and determine if I may be in a position to help. A great starting point is the link below in the show notes, which will take you to a short form to fill out, and you'll receive a free copy of an ebook that I've put together, The 7 Steps to Freedom Through Franchise Ownership. That'll also get us connected, and I'd love to set up an introductory call where I can explain a little bit more about the process that I use to help people determine if franchise ownership could be a great way to start charting their own path to freedom. So click the link below in the show notes, receive the ebook, and let's get connected. I'd love to hear from you. That's a really good point. So you mentioned, and this might be a question that kind of puts you on the spot, and if it is, we can back off. But you mentioned that a big misconception is that the franchise agreements are non-negotiable. And I've sold franchises for multiple brands, and I would kind of agree with what you said. I mean, many of the deals that we did had some change or tweak to the agreement, whether that's territory or changing language in a certain way that the franchisee was more comfortable with it. What are some of the, but there are things that most franchisors are not going to move on, right? So what are some of the things that realistically someone should not expect the franchisee, or I'm sorry, the franchisor to be willing to negotiate on?
Let's see if I can answer that question in two different ways. The first kind of more satisfactory answer is going to be that the major deal point that a franchisor really wants to stick across the whole system are typically not going to be negotiated. Those are the things like the ongoing royalties. Anywhere from 5 to 10% ongoing royalty, that's typical in a franchise system. Never say never, but typically from accounting purposes, from fairness purposes, they're going to want to keep whatever their royalty is amount, whatever their royalty amount is, they're going to want to keep it uniform across the entire system.
Yep.
Things like upfront fees. So those type of things, kind of big picture items that really are the backbone of what their business is, those typically stay the same.
Yeah.
Now, what is negotiable? Here's the very unsatisfactory answer: is it varies from client to client, and that's the truth there. There's not one thing. There's not 10 things that I say everyone has to do. And a good example: a few weeks ago, I had a client who was looking into an oil change business.
Mm-hmm.
And we get on the phone, and he says to me, he says, "Houston, by the way, my brother is a Pepsi distributor, and I want the ability to have a Pepsi machine in my oil change business and give everybody free Pepsis when they come in." Well, never in a million years would I have thought to write that into a contract, and
Right.
I'll be surprised if in the rest of my career I have somebody who tells me they want the ability to give away free Pepsis.
Yeah.
But we wrote into his contract that he can give his customers free Pepsis. And so
was the franchisor good with that?
And the franchisor said, sure, if that's what you want to do, that's what you can do that. But I mean, that's an extreme example. But yeah, every person who comes to me, they all have different sensitivities.
Yeah.
They've all been in a bad business or personal relationship in the past, and they want to make sure that XYZ doesn't happen again. Or they have some other business interest. They're getting into a pet grooming business, but their husband or wife is the dog walker, and they want to make sure that there's absolutely no way that the business can infringe on their spouse's dog walking business. So
yep.
It's stuff that there are some things that are routine that I see a lot, but you'd be surprised how many times a client says something to me and I'm just like, great, I'm so glad you told me that, because I could have sat here for 10 years and never have asked you the right question to figure out what to put in there. So that kind of gets to the bottom of what we're trying to do here. Is I want you to have the best business relationship. I want this to be the best legal contract that the client can have. But more importantly, I want this to work for everyone involved. And what's involved here are humans and individuals, and we all have our different things. And so let's figure out what those different things are and make sure you're in a good place.
Yeah, well said. From a strategy standpoint, right? So you're working with a client to review a franchise agreement. You're kind of with them identifying what are some of the key points that are concerning for them or that they would like to, request changes to, do you advise from a strategy standpoint around, hey, let's really prioritize like what's most important, right? Because if we go back with a laundry list of like 50 asks, number one, you're probably not going to get all of that. But number two, and depending on the back and forth between the franchisee and the franchisor, the negotiation could potentially start to sour the relationship a little bit before it even really starts. So do you have any advice or, that you give to your clients to, kind of walk that line of, getting a deal that they're comfortable with, but doing it in a way that is not going to essentially piss off the franchisor, for this new incoming franchisee?
So going back to the beginning of our conversation, I think that's where the value comes in of somebody who does a high volume of deals.
Yeah.
I have seen deals fall apart. I've seen deals come together, and I get to the point. I'm at a point now in my career where I know what to ask for and where I know what not to ask for, and what's a reasonable ask and what's not. That being said, I'm working on behest of my client, and what my client wants to do, I have to act in their best interest and give them advice. But also, if they say, hey, I want to request that I be able to wear a purple hat on Monday, then if that's what they want to request, then I'll make that request. But I have had that conversation, and it does happen where I say, you know what, client, these are all good points you make, and I understand them, but I think this is more of a conversation that we need to have with the franchisor, because I think if we come back asking for all these changes, that the franchisor is likely to either be kind of turned off by it, or second, there comes a strategy in negotiation where, do you ask for one or two things and you stick to your guns? That's definitely what you want. Do you ask for 5 things, knowing that you're only going to get 3 of them, but you're giving them 2 things to throw away? Or do you ask for 20 things, knowing that you're going to give some, take some away? The problem with 20 things, though, is that you might get them to say, heck, this is way too much. No, we're not going to entertain any of this. And I can think of 2 instances in my career, and I've done hundreds of deals, and I think I can think of 2 instances in my career where I have sent an addendum back to the franchisor. It's been not based on my advice. The client has said, this is what I need to move forward. I said, okay. And we've sent those addendums in, and I've gotten a call from the franchisor shortly thereafter. And they've said, Houston, just so you know, we're not going to move forward with your client anymore.
Yeah.
And I'll say, I completely understand. And they'll say, yeah, if this is how they're acting on day one, and these are their demands on day one, and they're clearly not listening to you. I have a reputation in the industry of somebody who shoots straight with all parties involved, and so they know if these people are asking for these crazy items that they're not listening to me either, and they'll come back and they'll say, hey, they're not listening to you. They clearly don't understand, so we're just not going to move forward with them. And those are tough conversations to have with the clients. But again, all I can do is go based on my experience in my past and tell them what will work, what won't work, what I think the best strategy is, and go from there.
Yeah. I think it's a balancing act, right? Because, you could run the risk of, coming across to the franchisor. And I think a lot of it too depends on what's happened, leading up to that point between the candidate and, the franchisor. How have they conducted themselves through the other aspects of the due diligence? But yeah, if the franchisor starts to get a sense that, as a franchisee, you're going to be, combative or, really, really just high maintenance, that they can get to a point where they're like, you know what, this is not worth it, and the best franchise.
Well, there, and let me say this: there's a flip side to that as well. It's not uncommon for me to get a call from somebody and us to go through the review, and I'll point something and I'll say, "Hey, you know what? This isn't common. I think based on what you're telling me, we really should ask them to change this clause, whatever it be." And that person says, "Well, no, I don't want to make the franchisor mad. I don't want to come across as difficult early on." And sometimes I have to have that conversation and say, "Hey, we're not being difficult. This is something that makes a lot of sense to change. They understand this.
Yeah.
They're in business. Let's go back to them. Let's be real reasonable. Let's ask for this change. I bet you they're going to give it to you, and it's not going to damage your long term relationship." So it really is a balancing game, because I do get those people who come to me and they're just afraid to ask for changes. And it's there was a, I don't know if it was a TED talk or a YouTube video of this guy who does 100 days of asking for random things, or asking for things he's scared to ask for. And I'm not doing a very good job summarizing, but this guy spends 100 days, and every day he films himself going into a business and asking for something that he thinks is just out of line, is out of control, is just a ridiculous ask. And after that 100 days, he realizes that it's amazing
what you get
when you just simply ask the question, what you get, and that there's no shame in asking. That yeah, you might get turned down 30% of the time, but those people don't hate you. They don't throw a pie in your face. It's that you ask a question, they say, "No, we can't do it." And you say, "Okay, thanks." And you walk out. But you know what? 60% of the time you make that ask, that sounds totally ridiculous to you, but they'll say, "Yeah, okay,
we could do that."
let's yeah." And that's something I try to teach my kids, and how I go through life is, a lot of times, just make the ask, and don't be a jerk about it. Don't be difficult about it. But if there's something you want and it's reasonable, ask. If they say no, okay, that's not the worst thing in the world. So, yeah, one client said this to me a few months ago, and I use it a lot. You can't fall up a tree. And so,
I like that.
yeah,
I like that.
yeah. So clients say, "Can we ask for this?" I say, "You can't fall up a tree. We can ask." They might say no, and if they say no, then you're in the same spot you are now. That particular request is not going to be something that is a deal killer.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, and I love the example of this guy asking for things for 100 days. I've heard Tim Ferriss talk about doing something similar, where he'll kind of intentionally put himself in these really uncomfortable situations, asking for something. Or I think he used to like go in a store and just lay on the ground and try to lay there for like 60 seconds at least. And if someone asked him, "Are you okay?" He'd be like, "Yeah, I'm fine." But just because it's awkward as hell, right? But it's kind of, training those muscles to, step out of your comfort zone or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think, look, like, here's a quick example. You're doing some work for my wife and I on an addendum for a franchise agreement that we're coming up to renew for one of the brands we own. And like the main sticking point we had, if we didn't push back on that, we would be terrible business people, right? Like,
Yep.
This is something that would, easily, clearly take money off of our bottom line, and a fairly significant amount of money. Like, if we didn't catch that, or if we just said, "Oh, we don't want to, push back on this because we don't want to damage the relationship with the franchisor," like, that would be a terrible business decision on our part. And so I think, to your point, if you're asking for things that are reasonable, the franchisor, they can't get too upset, right? You're just making good business decisions, and that's what they want their franchisees to do, is make good business decisions and build successful businesses.
The other advantage to hiring a franchise attorney, or any lawyer for that matter, is lawyers have a reputation as being jerks, and we are not well liked in society. And so I tell my clients all the time, part of what you're paying for is the good cop, bad cop
Mm,
routine.
yeah.
And it's not uncommon, and it doesn't hurt my feelings when a client says very reasonably to me, "Hey, I really want this clause changed," and I say, "Okay," and I put it in an addendum and send it over to the franchisor, and the franchisor pushes back, and to save face, they say, "Oh, well, I don't care about that clause. That's my jerk attorney. He's just being a jerk, and he told me that I have to do this." And that's good cop, bad cop, and the franchisor looks at me, and I shrug my shoulders, and I say, "Yeah, I'm an attorney. You're wanting to dislike me to begin with, so nothing has changed. So
Yeah.
um, don't don't be afraid. Also, that's what you're paying your attorney for, is to fight on your behalf and to be your advocate as well. So asking an attorney to be a bad cop is not uncommon, and any decent attorney is used to fighting a battle on behalf of someone else, even if it's a losing one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great point. So, what else do you think, before we wrap this up, what else do you think is important for, someone out there that's, considering investigating franchise opportunities, or, is actively looking at it? What is there anything that we haven't touched on that you think is important that they should be thinking about from the legal perspective?
Not from the legal perspective. What I'd say is this to people looking at getting into franchising: there is a wealth of resources out there, right? There are folks like Wes who can help you from the personal standpoint, identify what is a good system to get into, what's going to be a good fit for you. And then once you get into that, there's a whole industry, whether it's financing or legal, of professionals out there who genuinely want to help you.
Yep.
When it comes to the legal side or any other part of the process, stay within that ecosystem,
Mhm.
because it is the world of franchising. A lot of people call it the franchise family.
Yeah.
We're all in this together. We all want each other to be successful, and for the most part, those of us who do what we do are really good at it.
Yep.
And so get someone within the franchise family, find people to help you, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Because again, from the franchisor to the franchisee, from your lawyer to your consultant, whoever it is, a rising sea lifts all boats, whatever that
Yep.
saying is. We're all in this together. So use all those resources, and let's tackle this thing and become as successful as possible.
I love it. It's great advice. A mentor of mine always said he's owned, I don't know, 7 or 8 franchise brands over the years. He was the CEO of the last franchise brand that I worked for. Never suffer in silence, right? And you kind of made
That's
that
great.
point
I love
earlier,
that.
right? You got all these people out there, whether it's people, at the franchisor level, other franchisees in your brand, and then this whole ecosystem that you just described, which is so true. It's fascinated me since getting into franchising just how tight knit of a community it is. So many resources out there. So speaking of resources, Houston, this was very insightful. Where can people connect with you, learn more about you and your services? Where should we point people if they want to get in touch with you?
The absolute simplest way is to go to barneslaw.com, barneslaw.com. I recently overhauled the website. It's not a big one. I've kept it really simple, really straightforward, but there are a dozen places on there to contact me. Reach out to me. I will personally call you back within 24 hours, unless it's a holiday. But reach out to me no matter where you are in the process. I mean, I'm here to be your lawyer, but I'm also here to help the franchise ecosystem and to help people at all stages. If you have questions, I'm going to help answer them. because again, your success is all of our success. And so go to barneslaw.com, email me, call me, fill out a request for information, whatever you feel most comfortable with. You'll hear back personally from me, and we'll get you protected, and we'll get you being successful in this world.
I love it. I love it. We'll put the website in the show notes to make it easy for people to find. I've seen firsthand how quick your response and turnaround time is. So that's amazing. Thanks for everything that you do. Thanks for, taking some time out of your schedule to come on here and share a little bit with us. And I'm sure people will want to reach out after hearing you.
Well, I appreciate you, Wes, and we will talk soon.
All right, my man. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.